They laughed, not because they were brave, but because they thought they were safe. Ryan Mullery and his gang ruled Rosewood Hills Academy like it was their birthright, a golden bubble of privilege where fear was fashion and cruelty was currency. Students learned to stay silent, heads down, never make eye contact. Then one Monday morning, the silence broke. Two girls stepped through the polished front gates, identical braids swaying, calm eyes scanning the crowd like they'd seen it all before. Jada and Janelle Rivers, transfer students, outsiders, quiet, black. The bullies saw easy targets. But what they didn't see was the storm these sisters carried beneath their stillness. Because these weren't just new kids. These were warriors in disguise. And Ryan Mullery? He just made the worst mistake of his life. Rosewood Hills Academy stood like a monument to privilege. Rolling green lawns stretched out under a cloudless sky. The buildings, towering red brick with ivy crawling up the sides, looked less like a school and more like a private university. Inside, the halls gleamed. Polished oak floors, glass trophy cases lined with decades of accolades, and walls heavy with oil paintings of past headmasters and donors, all staring down with frozen smiles. It was a place where traditions were older than most family trees, a place where legacy students wore last names like armor, where unwritten rules mattered more than anything written down. And on that bright morning, as students clustered in tight circles of gossip and laughter, two figures broke the rhythm, Jada and Janelle Rivers. They moved through the courtyard side by side, identical uniforms crisp, their shoes nearly silent against the stone. Their skin gleamed rich and dark under the golden sun, and their matching braids swayed in time with their steps, like twin metronomes keeping a different beat from the world around them. They didn't speak. They didn't fidget. They didn't look like they needed anyone's approval. Jada, the elder by 7 minutes, walked with a precision that turned heads without trying. Every movement was deliberate, economical, like someone who knew how to measure risk without showing it. Her eyes, sharp and cool, swept the scene with the quiet calculation of a chess master sizing up a board. Beside her, Janelle wore the same uniform and the same calm, but with a softness around the edges, a disarming grace. She smiled quicker, laughed lighter, but her gaze held a different kind of steel, the kind that came not from anger, but from choosing when to unleash it. They weren't new to moving through hostile spaces. They had spent years learning how to be invisible when necessary, how to stand out without making themselves targets. But Rosewood Hills? This was different. This was a kingdom that had never been meant for girls like them. From the third-floor balcony overlooking the courtyard, a figure leaned against the railing. Ryan Mullery, the Prince of Rosewood, blonde hair perfectly tousled, designer backpack slung over one shoulder. His laugh, smooth, practiced, a little too loud, drifted down to his followers clustered nearby. Parker Green, whose family practically funded the school's science wing. Sean Vickers, the kid who never said much but always stood a little too close. And Claire Montgomery, Queen Bee since 8th grade, with a viciousness masked behind perfect white teeth. Ryan watched the twins with a lazy sort of interest. Another pair of scholarship kids, he assumed. Another charity case for the school to parade at open houses and donor events. He flashed that smirk, the one that said, "This is my kingdom," and whispered something that made Parker snort. The twins didn't flinch, didn't look up, didn't break stride. But if Ryan had looked closer, if he had seen past the surface, he might have noticed something different. Jada's fingers twitching briefly at her side, as if remembering an old rhythm. Janelle's eyes narrowing for a fraction of a second, like a storm cloud gathering heat. And tucked safely in the side pocket of Jada's bag was a worn photograph. Two little girls, fists wrapped in white tape, standing proudly next to a championship banner twice their size. They hadn't come to Rosewood to fit in. They had come to survive. And the kingdom Ryan ruled was about to get a lesson it would never forget. Their first class was English literature. Room 204. The air smelled of chalk dust and eucalyptus from the janitor's overzealous cleaning spree. Students filled the seats in clusters, laughter rising in cliques, all except for the last two chairs near the window. That's where Jada and Janelle sat, back straight, books stacked neatly, eyes locked on the board. They didn't text, didn't whisper, just watched. When Mrs. Eldridge asked everyone to share one personal item for a beginning-of-term project, most students pulled out bracelets, concert tickets, family photos. Janelle reached into her backpack and quietly placed a single item on her desk. A broken stopwatch, scratched, faded numbers, a smudge of dried blood on the side. No one noticed, except Parker Green, the one who noticed everything. He stared at it for a second too long. Janelle noticed him noticing. She gave a polite smile, then turned the stopwatch face down. Later, in the locker room, Ryan and his crew leaned into their usual rhythm. Comments too loud to be jokes, questions shaped like daggers. What kind of name is Janelle anyway? You two ever see a treadmill before? Hope you girls know how to keep up. Jada didn't respond, but she did pause, hand on her locker door, just long enough for her reflection in the metal to catch her own eyes. Behind her, the bullies laughed, and behind that, taped to the inside of her locker, was a photo, barely visible, a dusty Jim, a younger Jada, midair, leg extended in a clean arc. Her opponent, a full-grown man, mid-fall. The caption at the bottom, National Champion, age 12. But Rosewood Hills didn't see that. They saw two quiet black girls from a city. They saw easy targets. But what they didn't see was discipline forged in sweat and bruises. What they didn't hear were the early morning chants, the sound of fists hitting pads, the voice of their father repeating, "Control the storm. Don't be the storm. Until you have to be." The girls remembered. They always remembered, even when the world didn't. Something had shifted. At first, the bullying was like drizzle, small, annoying drops that barely registered. But now, it was a storm, deliberate and organized. And in the storm, the twins found themselves at the center, growing colder with every passing day. It wasn't just one person anymore. Ryan Mullery and his friends, Parker, Claire, and the rest of the elite gang had turned their attention to Jada and Janelle with the precision of a predator circling its prey. It was a calculated effort, not random, and it grew sharper with each interaction. The first sign came in the form of subtle exclusion, the kind that seemed harmless to anyone outside the group, but pierced the heart of anyone who was on the receiving end. The school cafeteria was their first battleground. Claire, as usual, led the charge. On the surface, she had offered the twins a seat at her table, a gesture that seemed warm, even welcoming. But Jada and Janelle quickly realized it wasn't an offer. It was a trap. The moment they sat down, Claire made an exaggerated, dramatic show of repositioning her purse on the edge of the table, leaving little room for either twin to get comfortable. Then, the others followed suit. The empty spaces around them filled with insincere smiles, whispers, and glances that didn't hide their disdain. Someone, Parker probably, made a pointed comment about how the chicken in the cafeteria was just like home cooking. The smirk that followed was too sharp to be innocent, and Janelle felt a flush creep up her neck, but she didn't respond. Instead, she focused on the food in front of her, pretending it didn't sting. By the end of lunch, it was clear that no one was going to invite them to sit again, not unless it was to humiliate them. It didn't stop there. The bullying was systematic, infiltrating every corner of the school. During gym class, Janelle was the first to finish the mile run, her legs burning from the effort, but her determination and skill were unmatched. As she crossed the finish line, her chest heaving with pride, she caught sight of Ryan smirking from the sidelines. His words, delivered loud enough for everyone to hear, were a thinly veiled jab. Guess that's what happens when you've been running around trees all your life. Ryan's crew laughed. Not just a casual chuckle, but the kind of laughter that echoed through the gym, infecting everyone around them with a shared sense of superiority. Janelle, heart pounding, fought the urge to retaliate. She bit her lip and kept her eyes forward, but she knew Ryan had been trying to put her in her place, to remind her that no matter how fast she ran, she was still an outsider. Then it escalated. The microaggressions turned into something more, something that couldn't be shrugged off. Janelle had left her gym clothes in her locker during class, something she had done 1,000 times without issue. When she returned, she was met with a sight that took her breath away. Her clothes were gone, all of them. Her hoodie, her jeans, even her sneakers, vanished without a trace. In their place, a garbage bag, tied with a piece of string, sat in her locker. Inside was a mockery of her clothes, stuffed haphazardly with trash. A note was taped to the bag, scrawled in bold black letters. Thought trash went in the bins. She froze. The air around her felt heavier. The weight of it pressed down on her chest, and for the first time, Janelle considered leaving the school. But she didn't. She couldn't. Jada, who had just entered the locker room, immediately understood. She didn't say a word as Janelle stood there, staring at the note. The twins locked eyes, a silent agreement passing between them. They wouldn't let this break them. Not yet. The digital war was already well underway. Ryan's private group chat, Rosewood Real Ones, was a breeding ground for mockery. Photos of the twins were shared there, altered with cruel captions and ugly edits. Once, someone posted a video of Jada raising her hand in class, her voice firm and sure as she answered a question. Beneath it, the caption read, "I bet you she can't even say banana without an accent." The comments flooded in. It's like they think they're still back in the jungle. Maybe they should teach us how to throw spears. Ryan's crew enjoyed the chaos. It was easy after all. It was just a few taps on a screen, a few lines of text, but it did its job. Slowly, but surely, the twins were being painted as outsiders. The more they tried to fit in, the harder it became. Every effort, every word, every attempt at normalcy was turned against them. Jada's project for the end-of-term science presentation became another target. She had worked tirelessly on it, poring over every detail of the design, making sure that everything was flawless. It was her chance to prove herself, to show that she belonged here just as much as anyone else. The day before the presentation, she carefully placed it in her locker. It was safe, or so she thought. The next morning, she opened her locker to find nothing but a plastic banana. A crude imitation of the project, wrapped in tape, mocking everything she had worked for. The note attached read, "Didn't want your roots to get tangled in all that tech stuff?" Jada didn't react immediately. Her hand gripped the banana tightly as the class filed in, ready for the first presentation. She was supposed to be the one to present, but instead, she was left holding a joke in her hands. Her heart was racing, but she didn't let the anger show. She didn't give them the satisfaction. Instead, she stood in front of the class, presenting her project, or at least what she would have presented. She spoke with clarity, describing her vision and the ideas she had put into her project, as though the banana in her hands had never existed. Her voice never wavered, though her fists clenched at her sides. The room was quiet. They had expected her to break, to crumble under the weight of the joke, but Jada didn't. She stood tall, dignified, and for the briefest moment, Ryan's smug smile faltered. But it was short-lived. The mark had already been made. Her grade? AC. The reason? Incomplete materials. It wasn't just a grade. It was another layer of the trap they had set. They weren't just trying to humiliate her. They were trying to break her down, piece by piece, until she felt like she didn't belong anywhere. The tension was palpable now, an electric charge that lingered in the air every time the twins walked into a room. It wasn't just the glares or the comments. It was the feeling of being hunted like prey that was always being watched, always being waited for. At this point, Jada and Janelle didn't need to speak to understand each other. They knew that the ground beneath them was cracking, and with every passing day, they were getting closer to the moment when it would break. The twins had stopped trying to fit in. The cafeteria was a battlefield, and they no longer ate there. The hallways were their gauntlet, and they couldn't escape the stares, the whispered slurs that echoed as they passed. But it was the isolation that cut the deepest. Rosewood Academy, once full of promise, now felt like a gilded cage. They were the last ones to be chosen for group projects. They were the first ones to be excluded from social events. Even the teachers seemed to overlook them, as if they too had bought into the narrative that they were different, that they didn't belong. But it was Ryan Mallory's subtle mind games that had the most devastating effect. It wasn't enough for him to make fun of their accent or heritage. He had decided to make it personal, to turn their bond into a weapon. One afternoon, during free period, Ryan found them walking together by the courtyard. He was leaning casually against the brick wall, arms crossed, his friends scattered around him like vultures waiting for a kill. They made sure to block the twins' path, forcing them to stop. It wasn't a coincidence. "What's wrong, girls?" Ryan's voice was sweet, but there was no mistaking the malice hidden beneath it. "You look like you've lost your spark." Jada didn't flinch, but she could feel the knot in her stomach tighten. Janelle's hands balled into fists at her sides, but she kept her face neutral. "You should smile more," Ryan continued, stepping closer, his voice dropping into a mockingly concerned tone. "It's such a shame that you're both so serious all the time. Maybe if you weren't so uptight, you'd actually make some real friends." Janelle's patience was already wearing thin, and she could see the look in her sister's eyes. Jada didn't say anything. Instead, she stepped forward, closing the gap between them. But before she could speak, Ryan's smirk deepened, and he pushed forward, invading their personal space even more. "Or maybe you just don't know how to let people in. Maybe you're too used to being on your own. That's a shame, isn't it?" It was then that something shifted in Jada. The line Ryan had crossed wasn't just about her anymore. It was about her sister, about their shared identity, and the subtle attempts to dismantle everything they had built, their strength, their bond, their pride. Janelle, who had been quiet until now, couldn't keep the anger at bay any longer. "You don't know a thing about us, Ryan. You don't even know who you're messing with." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Oh, do tell." Jada reached into her pocket, where her fingers brushed against the worn, smooth edges of the photo she had carried with her. It was an image from their last national tournament, the twins standing proudly with their team, arms around each other, gold medals hanging from their necks. They had been unstoppable then, but she didn't pull the photo out. Not yet. Instead, Jada looked Ryan dead in the eyes. She didn't need to say much more. They were no longer the shy, polite newcomers. The barrier they had built around themselves, the one they had so carefully constructed, was cracking, and it was time for him to see it. The twins had been patient, but this wasn't about to be swept under the rug anymore. But the worst part? The bullying wasn't even just physical. It was emotional, and Ryan had a knack for it. Later that week, during the final day of finals week, Jada received another text message. It was a screenshot, a picture of her from the talent show rehearsal, her face captured mid-laugh, completely unaware. At the top of the message was a note. "Guess who's auditioning for a talent show they'll never be invited to?" The comments that followed were the same as always, cruel, condescending. Ryan had taken the final moments of their dream and twisted it, using it as his tool for humiliation. The twins were exhausted, physically, emotionally, and mentally. The constant barrage of taunts and insults had drained them, and there were no moments of escape. They were always on guard, always prepared for the next attack. One evening, as they sat in their dorm room, Janelle spoke softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't do this anymore, Jada. I feel like I'm drowning. We've been playing by their rules, but they keep changing the game." Jada reached over, taking her sister's hand. "I know. I feel it too. But we don't have to take it anymore." There was a pause as both girls considered the weight of what was about to happen. They had been silent for so long, standing by while Ryan and his crew broke them down. But Jada knew, deep down, they couldn't let it go on any longer. Ryan's gang was everywhere, lurking like shadows, waiting for the next opportunity to pounce. He had made sure they were constantly under surveillance, constantly scrutinized. Every interaction felt like a test, a trap to expose their weakness. But the twins had their own secret weapon, the one thing that no one knew, no one expected, their martial arts training. They had spent years building their discipline, their focus, their power. It wasn't just about defense. It was about the mental clarity to know when to fight and when to walk away. And the time to walk away was over. They had been building toward this moment for months. And now, as the final bell rang, they knew they had a choice to make. Would they take the humiliation, or would they finally stand up? This was the moment the tension had been building to. The final bell rang with a loud, sharp clang, signaling the end of the school day. Students streamed out of classrooms and into the hallway, the buzz of casual chatter filling the air. For Jada and Janelle, though, it felt as though time had ground to a halt. Their hearts were beating louder than any of the voices around them. This wasn't just another afternoon. This was the moment they had been dreading, but also the moment they had been unknowingly preparing for, and they knew it. With each passing second, The weight of their decision grew heavier. Should they finally confront the bullies, stand up, show them their strength, demand their respect? Or should they let it go one more time, pretend it didn't hurt, pretend they weren't standing on the edge of something deeper and more dangerous? They were both silent as they walked side by side, their footsteps echoing in the otherwise empty corridor. The tension between them was thick. Neither one spoke. They didn't need to. They had spent countless hours together, silently supporting each other, knowing what the other was feeling. But right now, it felt as if words had lost their meaning. All they had was each other, and that was the only thing that kept them moving forward. Jada's grip tightened around the strap of her backpack. She could feel the weight of it on her back, but there was something else weighing her down, something heavier than any textbook or school supplies. It was the anger, the frustration, the exhaustion of being underestimated, of being judged solely on their appearance. It wasn't even the words anymore. It was the way people treated them, as if they were invisible, as if they didn't belong in a place like Rosewood Hills Academy. They had hoped it would get better, hoped they would eventually blend in, that the torment would stop. But it hadn't. It had only gotten worse. Janelle's face was unreadable, but Jada could tell by the tense set of her jaw that her sister was feeling the same turmoil. Their bond was as unbreakable as ever. But this was a different kind of battle. They weren't just fighting for respect anymore. They were fighting for their dignity, for their right to exist in peace, without fear of being taunted and humiliated every single day. They turned the corner, and there they were. Ryan Mullery, his gang, standing by their lockers, smirking like they owned the entire school. Ryan's eyes flicked up when they approached, and he smiled that smug, condescending smile that had been burned into their minds for weeks now. His crew, a couple of guys and one girl, stood behind him, laughing quietly among themselves, clearly enjoying the spectacle they had created of the twins. The group had always moved in tight formation, like wolves circling their prey. It was sickening the way they fed off each other's hatred. Jada's grip on her backpack tightened again, but this time, it wasn't the weight that bothered her. It was the rage bubbling up from within, the sense of injustice that felt like it would spill over at any moment. She knew this wasn't just going to be another insult. This was the final straw. But the question was, would they finally do something about it, or would they keep taking the punches? Ryan's voice broke the silence as he took a step forward. Well, he said, sneering. The little girls finally decided to show up, huh? Thought you two could just hide in the shadows forever? His words stung, but it wasn't just the insult. It was the way he said it, the way his friends laughed, how they all found it amusing that the two of them, the only black girls at the school, could be so easily pushed around. Janelle took a deep breath, her gaze steady. She wasn't going to let him see how much it hurt. That was exactly what they wanted. The whole purpose of Ryan's bullying was to break them, to show that they didn't belong. Ryan took another step toward them, his gaze flicking between the twins with a predatory glint in his eyes. What? No comeback today. What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? The others snickered in the background, and that's when it all clicked for Jada. The humiliation they had endured over the last few months had led them here, to this one moment. Ryan didn't care who they were. He didn't care that they had been kind, that they had kept to themselves, that they had never asked for anything. All he cared about was making them feel small, making them feel like outsiders. And today, they had had enough. They could walk away, as they had so many times before, but at what cost? How many more times could they allow themselves to be trampled? How many more days could they endure pretending it didn't bother them, pretending they weren't fighting a battle that was so much bigger than just high school? Jada's pulse quickened. She could feel the anger starting to burn in her chest, but it wasn't just anger. It was determination. They had been trained for this, not to lash out in fury, but to act with precision, to know when to hold back and when to strike. Years of discipline in martial arts had taught them patience. It had taught them when to be still, when to wait for the right moment. And now, the moment was here. Janelle's voice was calm, but firm when she spoke. You don't get to talk to us like that anymore, Ryan. Her words were cutting, and the change in her tone didn't go unnoticed. There was no hesitation in her voice, no fear. It was the voice of someone who had had enough. Ryan looked taken aback. He had expected them to cower, to be intimidated by his words, as they always had been. But this time it was different. This time they were standing tall. Or what? Ryan scoffed. You think you could do something about it? Jada stepped forward, matching Janelle's gaze with equal intensity. We've been quiet for too long, she said, her voice now firm, almost challenging. You're about to find out what happens when you push us too far. There was a charged silence, the kind that you only experience when something is about to break, when the air around you feels as if it could shatter. For a moment, no one moved, not even Ryan. It was as if they all sensed that the balance was tipping, that things were about to shift, that maybe, just maybe, the twins weren't as powerless as everyone had assumed. Jada's hand twitched, itching to release all the pent-up frustration, the resentment that had built over weeks and months. But she held herself back. There was no need for violence, not yet. What they were about to show Ryan wasn't about violence. It was about power. The power of standing up, the power of speaking out, and most importantly, the power of knowing who they really were. Janelle's next words hung in the air like a warning. We don't need to fight you, Ryan. We already know who we are. But you don't know who we are? Not yet. The threat wasn't about physical combat. It was about something deeper. They were done being underestimated, done being the butt of his jokes. The twins weren't just the shy, quiet girls anymore. They were a force to be reckoned with. And that's when Ryan realized it wasn't about strength. It was about respect. And at that moment, for the first time, he knew that the twins had it in them to do far more than just fight back. They had the power to make everyone around them take notice. Ryan's eyes narrowed as he stared at Janelle and Jada, his bravado cracking just a little. He wasn't used to being challenged. He was used to being the one in control, the one who had the power to make people feel small. But something in the way the twins were standing, shoulder to shoulder, faces unwavering, told him that today was different. He stepped back, trying to regain his composure, sneering. So, what now? You think you can intimidate me with those tough words? He waved a dismissive hand, as if swatting a fly. The other students watched from the sidelines, some pulling out their phones, others standing in tight groups, all sensing that something was about to happen. Jada, however, didn't flinch. Her eyes stayed locked on Ryan, steady as a hawk's. She had lived through the whispers, the jokes, and the cruel jabs for months, but now was the moment to reveal the truth that no one in Rosewood Hills could have ever guessed. Without a word, Jada subtly reached behind her back and grabbed a sleek silver keychain hanging from her backpack. A single twist of her wrist, and the keychain unfolded, a hidden blade. The others stared, caught off guard, but there was something even more unexpected about what happened next. It wasn't the blade or the sharp flash of metal that took everyone by surprise. It was the fluidity, the grace, the power with which Jada moved. In a blink, she dropped the keychain back in her bag and took a martial arts stance, her body low to the ground, balanced, focused. Janelle mirrored her, the twins forming an almost perfect reflection of each other. The stillness between them grew thicker, almost suffocating. The crowd fell silent. The only sound was the low hum of the fluorescent lights overhead, the steady rhythm of their breathing. Ryan, for the first time in his life, took a cautious step back. What the hell? His voice cracked. The twins were not just two girls from a different world. They weren't just outsiders. They were skilled, trained. And Ryan, who had built his reputation on bullying the weak and the vulnerable, had just discovered that the girls he had taunted, the girls he had ridiculed, were not as helpless as he thought. Janelle's voice cut through the tension, calm and sure. You thought you knew us, Ryan, but you never knew who we really were. Her words were powerful, not just because of their weight, but because they came with the truth that would shatter everything Ryan thought he knew about power. Jada's hand moved with precision, flicking the air in a defensive motion, and it was enough to make a ripple through the group of bystanders. Ryan's eyes darted between the twins, his confidence visibly cracking. What the hell is this? He spat out, his voice faltering. You think you're some kind of... I think you've underestimated us for the last time, Jada interrupted, her voice unwavering. And that's when it hit him. They were not just standing up to him. They were daring him to make a move, daring him to test them. The tension was no longer about words. It wasn't about taunts or insults. It was about who they had become in this moment. Ryan's face turned pale. His heart began to race, his palms growing sweaty. The rest of his gang stood motionless, unsure of what to do. They had no idea what they were witnessing, no idea that the twins had trained in martial arts since they were children, mastering techniques, discipline, and resilience. They had been prepared for this moment long before Ryan and his gang had ever decided to target them. The revelation was not just about their skills, it was about their courage. The twins had spent years honing their abilities, learning when to act and when to retreat. Today, they were choosing to fight. But it wasn't a fight for vengeance. It was a fight for their dignity, for the right to exist without fear, to stand up and say they would no longer be the victims. And Ryan Mallory, for all his bravado, knew that this was a fight he couldn't win. Not in the way he expected. Ryan's eyes darted around, looking for an out, but it was too late. The crowd had gathered too close, their phones raised, capturing every moment of this unexpected shift in power. No one was going to let him walk away without consequences. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, Janelle took one deliberate step forward, and in that single motion, she closed the space between them. It wasn't a move meant to threaten. It was a statement that they were done being the targets of his hatred, of his need to put others down to feel superior. Jada stepped to the side, her body moving with a fluid grace, like water flowing around a stone. She didn't need to be in front. She didn't need to be the one to deliver the message. They were a team. They had always been a team. And it was that bond, that unspoken connection, that made their next move so perfectly synchronized. Ryan took a step back, then another, his mind racing. His eyes flicked between the twins, and for the first time, doubt crept into his mind. But pride, and perhaps fear, kept him from backing down completely. "You really think you can scare me with all this?" he spat. Try to regain some semblance of control. "You think this is going to change anything?" Janelle tilted her head slightly, narrowing her eyes. "We don't need to scare you, Ryan. You're already scared." The words hung in the air like a challenge. The crowd, sensing the rising tension, grew restless. Some students started to whisper among themselves, their voices rising as they murmured their disbelief. This wasn't the kind of school fight anyone had expected. It wasn't a brawl or a shouting match. It was a battle of wills, a test of character, and the twins weren't backing down. Ryan took one final step forward, and it was all the twins needed. Janelle moved first. Her legs swept out in a fluid arc, knocking Ryan off balance and sending him stumbling backward into a row of lockers. The clang of metal on metal echoed down the hall. Ryan looked up, his face flushed with shock and humiliation. But that was only the beginning. Jada followed quickly, her movements precise and quick. She blocked Ryan's weak attempt to push himself up from the floor, sending him back to the ground with a swift tap of her foot. It wasn't violence. It wasn't about hurting him. It was about asserting their strength, showing that they weren't to be underestimated, that they weren't the quiet, defenseless girls everyone thought they were. Ryan tried to scramble away, but Janelle was already there, her hand gripping his shirt collar, pulling him to his feet with the same force and confidence she had shown earlier. There was no anger in her eyes, only cold, unwavering resolve. "This is where it ends, Ryan," Janelle said, her voice calm but laced with power. Not with violence, not with hate, but with respect. Ryan swallowed hard, his breath coming in short gasps. For the first time, the smugness was gone from his face, replaced by something much more uncomfortable: fear. Fear of what the twins had become. Fear of how powerless he truly was in the face of their courage. Jada stepped in front of her sister, offering Ryan one final look, a look that spoke volumes. "You're not the boss here anymore." And with that, they let him go. Ryan stumbled back, disoriented, humiliated. The twins didn't need to prove anything more. The message had been delivered. They weren't victims anymore. They were warriors, and everyone around them now knew it. The echoes of the confrontation slowly faded, leaving behind a sense of uncertainty. The hallways of Rosewood Hills Academy, usually bustling with activity, seemed oddly quiet. Students moved in hushed tones, casting furtive glances toward Jada and Janelle as they made their way down the corridor. The twins didn't speak to anyone, their footsteps heavy, the weight of what had just transpired still pressing on their shoulders. They had expected something, anything, but not the sheer gravity of what was unfolding. It wasn't just a fight that had taken place. It was a watershed moment for them and for everyone who had witnessed it. Back in the gym, the confrontation had left a scar, but the real repercussions of that day hadn't yet fully manifested. Behind closed doors, conversations were already brewing about power, about privilege, about what it meant to fight back. The aftermath of the fight was about to make a deep impact on the school, the students, and even the administration itself. The principal's office, a new kind of talk. It didn't take long before Jada and Janelle found themselves sitting across from Principal Harris. His office, usually a place of calm and quiet authority, felt tense with the weight of their actions. As they stepped inside, Jada and Janelle exchanged a quiet glance. Neither of them was sure what would happen next, but they were certain of one thing. Their fight for justice had just begun. Principal Harris was a man known for his even temperament, but today, there was an unmistakable firmness in his posture. He didn't greet them with a typical sit-down, but rather motioned to the chairs in front of his desk as he assessed the twins. His expression was a mixture of curiosity and concern, and for a moment, Jada wondered whether he would reprimand them for their actions. They had physically fought, against Ryan Mullery, one of the most well-known bullies in the school, and it wasn't exactly something that could go unnoticed. What if they were blamed for escalating things? But then, Principal Harris spoke. His voice was calm but firm. I've seen a lot of things in my years here, but I've never seen students fight back like that. I won't pretend that it was the ideal way to handle things, but I also know that sometimes students don't have many options left. Jada and Janelle exchanged a surprised glance. This wasn't at all what they had expected to hear. The bullying you faced, the constant torment from Ryan and his group, had to have been hard. No one should have to endure that. No one should have to feel like they're constantly under someone's boot heel just to get through the day. Principal Harris paused, his eyes scanning the papers in front of him. It was as though he were weighing his words carefully. What happened today, it wasn't just about you two standing up for yourselves. It was about breaking a pattern that has existed in this school for far too long. Janelle's heart skipped a beat. Had they just been given some kind of pass? Was this a free pass for fighting back? They had expected discipline. They had expected a lecture, maybe even suspension. But instead, Principal Harris was acknowledging their pain, their struggle, and somehow, even their need to fight back. You're not being punished, he said, after a pause, as if reading their minds. But Ryan and his group are going to face consequences for their actions. This isn't over, not by a long shot. Jada and Janelle nodded, their gazes fixed on the principal. They didn't speak, but they knew, deep down, that this moment would mark a turning point. Principal Harris continued, but I want you to understand something. The school is watching you now. What you did today wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. The fight was your statement, and now you have a platform to make sure something like this never happens again. You've already changed the dynamic here, and I want you to think about how we can use this to change the school for the better. Jada couldn't believe what she was hearing. She and Janelle had merely wanted to protect themselves, to defend their dignity. They hadn't expected to be thrust into some kind of leadership role, but now it seemed that their actions were going to be more significant than they had ever imagined. Principal Harris leaned back in his chair, his voice softening. I want to offer you both the opportunity to work on a new initiative at the school, a student-led anti-bullying campaign. It's time to put a stop to this toxic culture. Your fight today showed me that you're ready to take the reins. The words hung in the air, and Jada felt a strange mixture of pride and hesitation. They hadn't planned on this, on becoming leaders. But here it was, staring them in the face. Well, think about it, Janelle said quietly. But thank you for not punishing us. Principal Harris gave them an encouraging smile. You made the right choice today. It wasn't about violence. It was about standing up for what's right. Ryan's consequences, a family crisis. While Jada and Janelle were receiving support, Ryan's world was crumbling. The moment he had walked into the principal's office, he had known this was serious. His parents, his ever-protective parents, had come with him, and they were furious. How could this happen? Their son had always been the dominant figure at Rosewood Hills. How could two girls, two outsiders, embarrass him so publicly? But there was no avoiding it now. The reality of the situation hit Ryan harder than anything he had ever faced. The humiliation was one thing, being beaten by two girls in front of his friends, but the fallout from that moment was something far worse. Principal Harris laid it out matter-of-factly. Ryan, you've crossed a line today. The bullying you've been involved in is no longer going to be tolerated. You're being suspended for 2 weeks, effective immediately. After that, you'll be on probation for the rest of the semester. You'll also be required to attend mandatory counseling sessions to address the bullying behavior, and I expect to see improvement. Ryan sat still, the realization slowly creeping in. He couldn't escape the consequences of his actions anymore. His mother's voice trembled as she tried to intervene, but the principal stood firm. Ryan, you're a bright kid. You have potential. But this behavior, it's unacceptable. You need to take responsibility for what you've done. You can't keep pushing people around and thinking there will be no repercussions. And as for your friends, Principal Harris glanced at Ryan's father, who had been quietly seething in the chair next to him. They, too, will face consequences for their involvement. You will all have to face the music. The moment was almost surreal. Ryan had always been the king of his social circle, the one who determined the fate of everyone else. Now it was him who was being judged. He wasn't used to being on the receiving end of the school's disciplinary system, and it was a bitter pill to swallow. The truth was, Ryan had always relied on intimidation to get what he wanted. He had never considered the possibility that his victims could stand up for themselves. And now, as the principal's words sank in, Ryan could feel his world shatter. The facade of control, the reputation he had carefully cultivated, had come undone in a matter of minutes. The consequences of his actions were unavoidable. His suspension wasn't just a break from school. It was a break from the power he had once wielded with ease. His parents, once his staunch defenders, sat there in stunned silence. Ryan's fate had been sealed, and for the first time, he didn't know how to fight back. The ripple effect. Word spread quickly. The halls of Rosewood Hills Academy buzzed with gossip and murmurs. The confrontation between Jada, Janelle, and Ryan had become the talk of the school. Some students were still in shock, not fully understanding the weight of what had happened. Others were beginning to feel the ripple effects of the twins' actions. There was a growing sense of empowerment among the student body. They had seen Ryan Mallory, the untouchable bully, taken down. They had witnessed what standing up for oneself could achieve. But the consequences didn't just stop at the principal's office. They began to affect the entire school culture. Ryan's once loyal followers started to pull away, unsure of where they stood in the new pecking order. His arrogance, once contagious, now fell hollow. Even the teachers who had turned a blind eye to his bullying were left questioning their roles in allowing such behavior to persist. Jada and Janelle's standing within the school was also shifting. The twins had never been popular. They had never been part of the inner circle. But now, they found themselves at the center of something much bigger. They were no longer the victims. They were the ones leading the charge for change. It wasn't just a matter of survival anymore. It was about creating a new legacy for themselves and for future students. As they walked through the halls the next day, they noticed something they hadn't before. The whispers had stopped. The eyes that had once looked at them with disdain or indifference now held respect. The students who had once laughed at their expense now nodded at them, acknowledging what they had done. Jada and Janelle had taken control of their narrative, and they had only just begun. Their actions had sparked a transformation that would ripple through the school for years to come. Ryan Mallory and his gang had been knocked off their pedestal, but the real victory was in the shift in power. No longer would students like the twins have to hide in the shadows. The consequences of the fight weren't just personal. They had forever altered the culture at Rosewood Hills Academy. And as for the twins, they now carried the torch for change, ready to take on whatever came next. The days after the confrontation felt like a blur for Jada and Janelle. They had done what they needed to do, but now they had to live with the consequences. Not just the school's reaction, but their own inner turmoil. For Jada, the pride she'd initially felt began to fade into confusion. She had always prided herself on discipline and control, yet in that moment with Ryan, she had acted on instinct. The weight of that impulsive decision began to sink in. The fight had been necessary, but now, it felt like something more complicated. Was this how standing up for yourself felt? Was this really a victory? In quiet moments, Jada found herself replaying Ryan's shocked face, wondering if she had truly made the right choice. She had protected her sister, but was she proud of how it all unfolded? That internal struggle was harder to reconcile than she had imagined. Late one night, she confided in Janelle, voicing her doubts. "I don't know if I feel proud of what happened," Jada admitted softly. "It's like something took over me, and now I don't know who I am." Janelle listened, understanding. They had shared the experience, and now they would share the healing process, too. Janelle, meanwhile, found herself grappling with a different kind of pressure. Since the confrontation, people had begun to look at her differently. They respected her, even admired her. She was being seen as a leader, a symbol of change. But the idea of living up to those expectations terrified her. Could she really be the person people thought she was? One evening, a friend messaged her, suggesting she run for student council, saying everyone now looked up to her. The pressure weighed on her. She had never asked for this role. The expectations of others felt like a heavy mantle she wasn't ready to carry. She began to question everything. Was she really prepared to lead? Was she faltered? But as Jada reminded her, they didn't have to have all the answers. They had made it this far together, and they would keep moving forward, no matter how uncertain the future seemed. In the end, despite the emotional toll, the twins found strength in each other. The fallout wasn't just about what they had done. It was about who they were becoming. They didn't have all the answers, but they had each other. And together, they would face whatever came next. The story of Jada and Janelle is one of resilience, self-discovery, and the power of standing up against injustice. Through their journey, we see how powerful it can be to defend yourself and protect those you love, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. But more importantly, the story highlights that the true strength lies not just in physical action, but in the ability to confront your inner conflicts, question your choices, and find peace with who you are.